Hello and welcome to the November 27th edition of the Bubb Report. I am the Bubb Report's assistant producer, Rion Charles. Last week, the COP27 summit ended 39 hours after the scheduled close, as climate negotiators from the world's richest countries hammered out new funding arrangements with negotiators from the world's developing countries who are experiencing the worst effects of the climate crisis.
And we begin to do things differently. We will be holding people to account, be they presidents, prime ministers, or CEOs, an accountability chief, if you may, because our policies, our businesses, our infrastructure, our actions, be they personal or public, must be aligned with the Paris Agreement and with the Convention.
Years when a pandemic hits us, we know what it is to put a man on the moon, and now we're putting rover on Mars. We know what it is. But the simple political will that is necessary, not just to come here and make promises, but to deliver on them and to make a definable difference in the lives of the people who we have a responsibility to serve, seems still not to be capable of being produced.
The Sharm el-Sheikh Climate Change Conference convened against the backdrop of multiple crises spanning energy, cost of living, indebtedness, nature loss, and geopolitical tensions among major powers. Yet, as the Earth's Negotiators Bulletin summary report of the meeting underscores, quote, "The need to act in the face of the climate crisis has never been clearer," unquote. The urgency of this emergency was also underscored by Grenada's Minister for Climate, the Honorable Kirine James.
We are also concerned, Mr. President, about the slow progress on financing in general and financing for loss and damage in particular. This is a matter of the highest priority for my country, which has had more than its fair share of climate-related impacts in recent times.
This week, we discuss the implications of the just concluded summit with one of the experts who accompanied the Grenadian delegation at the event. Also on the report, the recent spate of high-profile gunpoint robberies at two prominent businesses on the island of Grenada have prompted some in the national community to issue warnings that Grenada may well be headed the way of other OECS territories that are experiencing a significant explosion in crime rates. At an average of 30 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants per year, the English-speaking Caribbean now has one of the highest murder rates in the world. Incidents of assaults, burglary, kidnapping, and rape are rising above the world average. The Caribbean countries of Belize and Jamaica have declared states of emergency to grapple with rising crime. The Turks and Caicos Islands, which were once one of the Caribbean's safest islands, have witnessed a worrying rise in violent crime, with 21 killings since September 2022. Grenada, however, continues to have one of the lowest crime rates in the region, notwithstanding these worrying trends in the wider OECS and CARICOM areas. This week on our program, we look at crime in the OECS and ask whether or not Grenada should be worried that the tsunami of crime will eventually inundate the Spice Isle. We welcome our guests, Dr. Spencer Thomas, Grenada's lead climate negotiator, Jerry Edwin, Grenadian criminal defense attorney, Osbert Regis, St. Lucia's former commissioner of police, and Dr. Niels Chaitan, crime reduction specialist. Here is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial. We thank you for joining us.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the program. Now, before we begin this week's editorial, I just want to pause and reflect on the untimely and shocking passing of the late Jacinta Bubb of Laborie St. George's. Jacinta, the mother of 4 wonderful children and the loving wife of Russell Bubb, passed away unexpectedly at the General Hospital in St. George's last week after completing what was expected to be a routine surgical procedure. Her shocking death has the community reeling in disbelief, as we have all come to know Jacinta, or Mom, as one of the most pleasant and most down-to-earth human beings one can encounter. The St. Paul's and Laborie community lost a matriarch, a friend, a trail leader, and a sister. I know all too well the pain that her children are dealing with at this difficult time, and I wish you nothing but comfort, love, light, and healing. May her soul rest in peace, and may her memory be a blessing. And now let us segue into the editorial of the week. The current administration rode on a wave of goodwill that they will offer a new mode of governance, armed with fresh ideas to move Grenada forward. Lingering resentment with the previous administration, and in particular its leader, Dr. Keith Mitchell's reticence to step away from leadership, took the NDC to the finish line, and it gave an ironclad 9-seat mandate to govern on behalf of all of Grenada. In the spirit of this new transformational thrust, the administration, under its erudite and youthful leader, also assures that they will have a more open and cordial relationship with the Grenadian media, especially with the tiny group of Grenadian journalists who can still lay claim to being independent and credible. During the last campaign, Prime Minister Mitchell was adamant that government ministers meet the press to articulate their policies and visions. This is what he said.
We subject ourselves to scrutiny, and we've never held public office. But those who've held public office for 38 years cannot go on the Kelon Bob show. They do not appear on the Calistro Faria show. They do not appear on Beyond the Headlines. They do not have pocket meetings and give you the mic to ask them questions. So ask yourself, when they do not wish to subject themselves to your scrutiny, to answer your questions, to meet and greet and hear from you, why are they still coming back and asking you to allow them to represent you?
In the lead up to the last elections, this program critiqued the previous government for its very biased and divisive practice of pitting some journalists against others, inviting some journalists to press conferences and not others, and holding specially curated media availabilities. While they attempted to bring clarity to issues of national importance, these media sessions devolved into softball activities that failed to ask the pertinent and tough questions uppermost in the minds of the citizenry. This, of course, left a bitter taste in the mouth of the national community. Our gripe here is less with the administration's direction than with the press secretary and communication structure at Botanical Gardens. The Prime Minister's press secretary, a position which is paid for by the taxpayers of Grenada, doesn't have the courtesy to respond to any inquiries for information put forward by the media. In the last week, the Bubb Report sought to inquire about government's deliverables concerning the just concluded climate summit. Ms. Carter read our messages via WhatsApp and did not even have the courtesy of responding. Other journalists, citing a reluctance to speak publicly on this issue, have expressed a similar concern. Some note that she has not responded to their messages for months. At least the previous press secretary, Ms. Philomena Robertson, always responded to me with a definitive no in all cases, saying that former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell did not have time for the Bubb Report. But at least she responded. As one of the official spokespersons for the administration, the press secretary must weave together the interests of reporters and the Prime Minister's cabinet. The press secretary must also work with various constituents and government officials to create a portrait of government and its policies that they want to deliver publicly, which goes beyond moderating these very infrequent need to know press briefings that are happening these days. And while the administration's position may be one of only talking to its base via its platforms, such as the NDC Heartbeat program and the Government Information Service, they must be aware that the press, with all of its flaws, is still a feature of the democratic process in Grenada. So while you may rightly disagree with the reporting approaches of some journalists, that's not a good reason, respectfully, to engage in the practice of strategic ghosting. Madam Press Secretary, please respond to your messages. And welcome again, folks, to this live episode of the Bubb Report. And I will quickly segue into our first guest that was teed up in the introduction. And he is Dr. Spencer Thomas, no stranger to issues of climate change and climate negotiation. As a matter of fact, he is Grenada's chief climate negotiator. And I believe this is also your first appearance on the Bubb Report. Dr. Thomas, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bob, and thank you for your invitation to this program. First time, of course.
Yes, and I also, go ahead, please.
Let me also thank you for inviting me to speak on this particularly important subject and to give my perspectives on it. And let me say good morning to all our listeners out there.
Absolutely. I also found out in my background research on you, sir, that we are both fellow Howard Bisons, having attended Howard University.
That's correct.
I didn't know that. So we are kindred spirits.
For me, it was many moons ago.
Okay. Well, I just graduated last year from the Mecca. So we have something in common there. But Dr. Thomas, let's get into it. So Caribbean countries which continue to bear the brunt of the climate crisis. We're talking about extended droughts. We're talking about irregular rainfall patterns. We're talking about major storms. We're hearing conversation now that we might have to change the way that we categorize storms, that storms are breaking the bands of these 4 and 5 categories that we have. And so we continue to bear the brunt of this climate crisis. Now, we seem to have eked out some concessions from the world's biggest fossil fuel producers at the COP summit. What role did negotiators like yourself play in ensuring that we were able to have a loss and damage provision that was substantial and sustainable?
Thank you very much, and thank you for that question. Yeah. I think it is important that we recognize as we deal with this subject that we need to get to the context of the climate negotiations. And maybe I could start there if I may, bring you back and give you some context on these climate negotiations. I think we have to recognize, first of all, that the issue of human-induced climate change came around 1856, thereabout. That was when it was first recognized, human-induced changes to the climate system. And it took thereafter almost 100 years before we could actually get to the climate convention signed in 1992 in Rio, among the 3 Rio conventions, climate change and land degradation. But between that period, there were a lot of climate deniers. Many persons were concerned that this was not the correct science at that point. But up to that, they recognized that, yes, there is this credibility in the science, that greenhouse gas in the atmosphere is causing climate change. and primarily from fossil fuel, burning of fossil fuel, the release of methane from landfills and livestock, and other HFCs and so on, and other gases like that. So that is the context in which this was done. Now, the convention was signed in 1992. 1992, of course, the Rio Conventions. The science of climate change at that time was very clear and incontestable, to the extent that over 197 countries ratified the convention. And everyone felt that climate change is a global problem and it requires a global solution. So while we, as small island developing states, members of small island states, we felt that climate change poses an existential threat to small island developing states. So that is the context in which we participate in the negotiation and the role that we play. We recognize that for small island developing states and for Grenada, we have unique vulnerability and special circumstances of those countries. And that has to be played very strongly in the negotiation. We also believe that the key issue is the voice of small island states must be heard in climate change. The voice must be here. So the rules there is to make sure that the voice of the small island states are in the climate change negotiation. Because we believe that, and we agree that if you're not on the table of the climate negotiations, you will be on the menu. So that is basically what the small island states are thinking here. So we have to be there to defend our position, and that is the main role that we play when we go to this climate, because we are seen as the conscience of the climate debate. We are the ones who suffer the most, who have contributed the least, and who continue to take the bulk of the adjustment for climate change. So the voices of small island developing states has to be very, very prominent in the debate. And that's why Grenada, small island developing states, all the Caribbean countries are all in the climate negotiations to ensure that the voices of small states are in the negotiation.
Now, Dr. Thomas, let us get into the weeds a little bit. However, industrialized nations, and while you say that the voices of small island developing states such as Grenada's is extremely important to be at the table, now, industrialized nations have made commitments with respect to climate abatement in the past. For example, they have committed to capping global temperatures at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. That goal has not been met. We might actually surpass that cap. They've also committed to reducing emissions by 2030, and that will also fail. What would make this loss and damage package work?
Well, let me say first of all that what we agreed in the Paris Agreement in 2015 was that the mitigation target was well below 2 degrees, and to pursue efforts to ensure that it does not cross 1.5. That is the target. So we have been very clear as small island developing states that the breaching of the 1.5 target is a no-no for us. It's a point on which we should not get. We are currently at 1.1 degrees Celsius, and we are seeing the impacts of climate change across the world. And the science is very clear that every fraction of a degree warming gives you exponential impacts. Mm-hmm. So every fraction. So we are at 1.1. So on the way to 1.5, we will expect to have even greater impacts on our economies. This is what we felt. So 2 degrees is not a point of which the small island developing states are thinking about at all. We're thinking about well below 1.5 was our refrain. Well below 1.5.
1.5 to stay alive. I do remember
1.5 to stay alive.
Yeah.
So that is the issue. And every fraction. So it's not 2 degrees. And the science is clear. And even after the COP in Paris in 2015, the science has even become clearer to indicate what are the exponential impacts that would happen as we increase our warming beyond where we are at the moment. So it is very clear. We know exactly what we have to do from what the science has said. We know why we have to do it from what the science has already indicated. We know when it should be done and who should be doing it and how it should be done. We know all of that. The question is why? Why is it not happening? Why is it not happening? We know that we need to have reductions in emissions by 50%. by 2030 on 2010 levels. We know that we need to peak emissions by 2025. We know that we have 10 years in which to really get ambitious climate action going. But yet still we have a great affinity to the issues of coal, oil and gas, and that's the problem. So I think there is a missing element. And in your introduction, you mentioned, I think there was a clip from the Prime Minister from Barbados.
Mia Mockley, yes.
Is missing. What is missing? And her point is the political will is missing. And maybe that is correct. Maybe that is true because we know exactly what needs to be done. Clearly, renewable energy and energy efficiencies, clearly, nature-based solutions, clearly, getting out of fossil fuel, getting out of methane and reducing methane and so on. And investment flows need to be in the proper direction for renewable energy and energy efficiencies. We know all of that. Yet still, the resources are not able to come. The planned resources from developed countries, they are indicated by 2020, they will be able to have $100 billion per year for climate action. That is yet to be realized. The OECD has indicated that it is up to 83 point something billion. Someone else, I think Oxfam, have done some evaluation of that same data and they indicated that it is far less than that, maybe 20 something or 30 something billion. That's where we are. So there is a gap here, a significant finance gap. There is a significant emissions gap. There is a significant adaptation gap. And that is why the COPs are very important so that we can at least try to close those gaps. We saw, and there is a big argument, we saw when the COVID came, how it was easy or maybe easier to motivate and to gather tremendous resources to address the COVID issues, especially in developed countries. We also see the response to the current conflict in Ukraine. What is the response to climate change? And then we know very clearly that we are not on track to the 1.5 pathway. We are not even on track for the 2 degrees pathway. We are basically on track to 2.4 to 2.7, which is far outside of the range that we are even talking about. So something has to be done. And as have been said, it seems to me that the political will is the missing element to really get this climate. So going into the COP is to also develop this political will, because you recognize that at the beginning of the COP, you do have high-level segments where heads of states around the globe, and I think there were over 100 heads of state at the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, declaring their positions and policies on climate. I think that's very important, and it's something that we need to look at, because that's where we have to start to build. But the geopolitical issues are the ones that in the way of having that climate reaction that we need to ensure that we stabilize the greenhouse gas atmosphere in the atmosphere.
But let us talk about the size of these delegations, Dr. Thomas, really, and the carbon footprint for attending these conferences. Now, on average, each country sends around 5 to 10 people. I believe the Grenadian delegation was around that. I could be subject to correction. Mm-hmm. Delegates jet across the globe, emitting more carbon in the atmosphere to attend the summit to discuss the reduction of carbon. Mm-hmm. Dr. Thomas, isn't that counterintuitive?
Well, I believe that the absence of the multilateral process is a problem. It's chaos. We need to be together. We need to have dialogue amongst parties to resolve the problems that we have. And that is very critical in my view, that keeping that multilateral process alive. And you have to travel to do that. I have no problem with this. The question is, what is happening when we travel to these meetings? We have to recognize there are several other things that are happening at the same time. Apart from the negotiation itself, much is happening. We had over 30,000 persons traveling to Sharm el-Sheikh. But much of those persons have to do with a lot of other issues relating to capacity building, issues relating to knowledge transfer, what solutions, issues relating to innovation, technology, showing technology and to ensure that best practices are. So there are a lot of these things happening in the margins of the negotiation. Mm-hmm. There is also a very active lobby a very active lobby against actions that we take in terms of climate change. And these people travel to lobby also. So we have to look at the totality of the travel for various purposes. People travel there to bring a message. People travel there to negotiate. So I think it is important that the multilateral process is kept alive by at least people talking to each other, and so that we don't descend into chaos, that everybody does whatever they need to do. They don't talk to each other. So I think the travel is important to get to the space where we can at least work out some of the issues and move to the solution, because we have a common problem. It's a common problem across the globe. And to solve a common problem, we need to have a common space to do so. And the COP is one of the spaces to do that.
I still am just miffed by the idea that so much people need to be attending these conferences. But we would digress. I am not a fan of the royal family, as many people probably know, but Prince Charles, the head of Grenada's head of state, is one of those who opposes the idea of sending throngs of people to these summits, and he's suggested perhaps a more hybrid approach, which I think should be used moving forward. But of course, you are the expert on this. But let us talk, Dr. Thomas, about the deliverables for Grenada and other Caribbean islands with respect to the loss and damage question. Now, you accompanied the Grenada delegation. As I understand it, you are one of the subject matter experts there and one of the negotiators, of course. What would loss and damage look like, and what were we able to get out of that as substantial deliverables that Grenada can take back to its constituents?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize that we went to the COP. Let me first say that in terms of my feeling and my assessment of the outcome of the COP, I will say it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 5. I mean, that's my personal feeling.
Okay.
But I think it is based on the fact that prior to going into the COP, Grenada and the CARICOM and an alliance of small island states set themselves some key priorities going into the COP. And the key priorities were: 1, mitigation ambition to close the gap that we just spoke about, to keep 1.5 within reach, and that the national determined contributions must be aligned to 1.5, and we must have implementation of those pledges and those commitments. We also had adaptation to climate change, to cope with climate change. We need to have progress on that, and we need to build resilience across the countries, national resilience also, community resilience to deal with the issue of climate change, and resources to be made available for this. And the third priority was finance, and the key really. We need ambitious action on adaptation and mitigation, and finance is basically a means to do so. We had asked that we need to support the doubling of finance for adaptation. And we're talking here now grant-based financing. Adequate, predictable, grant-based financing for climate action. This is the key. And of course, we developed countries need to scale up that finance requirements and to meet the problem of the 100 billion goal that we have set up. So that was the third priority. The fourth priority, and maybe that was the headline in the COP, was the establishment of the fund and our financing facility for loss and damage. That was a critical request from small island developing states. And I think we could go back in the history a bit in terms of what happened with this loss and damage. Loss and damage was first introduced to the COP in 1991, even before the COP was really ratified and signed up in 1992. Small island developing states floated the idea of having loss and damage as a central pillar in the climate negotiations. As at that time, they had the international negotiations to form the convention. Since then, 1991. What happened since? The first time that loss and damage came into the negotiating text, it was able to go into the negotiating text, was 2007 in Bali. Grenada was then the chair of small island developing states at that point in time, when loss and damage was a feature in the negotiation text for the first time. Okay, over the years, several years, incremental progress have been made. In 2013, they formed what we call the WASA International Mechanism for Loss and Addressing Loss and Damage. Long title, but basically it is to move the envelope on loss and damage. In 2015, loss and damage had a chapter in the Paris Agreement. It's a significant movement there. Very hard work to get that done. In 2019, a network was developed, what we call the Santiago Network, to push again loss and damage. In 2021, AOCs and small and several countries asked for a loss and damage fund because they felt that all that have been done in the past did not amount to any significant improvement in the loss and damage movement for small states. So they pushed for a fund to be set up and established specifically to deal with loss and damage. That was not agreed at all in Glasgow. Instead, what we got was a dialogue, a Glasgow dialogue to continue to talk. So AOCs went into this COP very clear that they're not leaving there without the establishment of the fund. And that is what happened in the last hours of the negotiation. The fund was actually established, and a transition committee has been established to work out the scope, the modalities, the institutional framework, the governance framework. So they have a year to do so, to go back to the UAE next year to formalize in a stronger way this loss and damage issue. So that is the issue on loss and damage at the moment. It is still work in progress, and as I said, it took 30 years to get to this point, from 1991 up to this point. And I think the small states are resolved that loss and damage need a special place, because we felt that mitigation, we don't have enough ambition for mitigation and implementation of mitigation action. For adaptation, the ambition is low, and we don't have sufficient funds to drive the adaptation question. And there are limits to adaptation. There are issues that loss and damage comes in. So without adequate mitigation, without funds for adaptation, we get into the field of loss and damage. Loss and damage is beyond adaptation. We're talking about here loss of species, loss of lives, irreversible changes, slow onset events like sea level rise and so on that could have serious impacts. Saline intrusion in your agriculture, in your aquifer, and reduce agricultural productivity. Your loss of your coral reefs. When you lose your coral reefs, you lose your coral reefs. When you lose your species, you lose your species.
There is no return. There is no return.
And you're not responsible. So there is a question of climate justice, and that's why this just transition thing came into the play.
But Dr. Thomas, I'm going to push back there slightly on the responsibility question. Certainly, the industrialized North, the big bad industrialized North, has major culpability in this. But shouldn't there also be some personal responsibility on the part of small island developing states such as Grenada to ensure that it is also protecting its environment?
Of course. I mean,
and not destroying the coral reefs, not destroying the mangroves, not building mega hotels in places that are supposed to be ecologically sensitive. Your thoughts on that idea?
Of course. I mean, every body, every country has to do take climate action, and yes. So this is undisputed. I mean, and that's why we are into this issue. What we are saying as small island developing states is that we need resources from the international community, from the polluters, to ensure that we can take the actions necessary on the ground to bring benefits to our people and to ensure that we keep our bargain. We have actually developed our own nationally determined contributions, which gives the obligations on Grenada for climate mitigation. We are also developing the National Adaptation Plan, which again will spell out the national policy towards adaptation. The question is, we need resources to implement both the nationally determined contributions and the National Adaptation Plan. We have identified that for the period 2021 To 2030, we will need $1 billion to implement the nationally determined contributions, and another 400 million US was required for the adaptation program in its first 5 years. So we're talking about significant resources, and that's one of the reasons why we are in the debate, and our voices need to be heard so that resources, grant-based resources, can be made available for small island developing states like Grenada to ensure to push its development agenda. We must recognize also that we are talking here not only about climate change, we're talking here about sustainable development. We're talking about 17 sustainable development goals, which are all interlinked. Climate change, goal 13, is totally linked with goal 14 and goal 15, biodiversity goals, poverty goals, goals on energy, production and consumption, food safety and security, and all of this. All these are all interrelated to the extent of education. All of that are interrelated. So we need resources for climate, of course, but also to ensure that we can implement sustainable development goals and to ensure that we implement the sustainable development goals as indicated.
And let us get to some viewer comments, and then we would wrap up this segment. Someone is saying, we know about climate change, but how much attention are we paying to the destruction of the country by the Chinese? I'm not following that comment, but I think the viewer is saying by the buildings that are being constructed by Chinese investors. Craig Paul is saying, start climate change here. Stop burning plastic, disposing vehicle oils in drains, rivers, and streams. Decrease burning of carbon from carbon metals in our community and homes. Tax vehicles that emit carbon monoxide on public roads. Do more climate preservation promotions and education starting in our local schools via local media. Then we have another comment from Tessa Barry, who's saying, we also have to look at farming practices that can be changed to reduce the impact. Agricultural practices are big contributors. Anthony DeRiggs, this should not interfere with the mangrove wetlands area. A huge storm will reveal the folly of doing so. Marcel Belmer is saying, unless individual countries put policies, laws, and regulations in place to stop human induced land degradation, we will continue to experience massive slides, floods, and major losses to our agricultural produce. Just some comments from viewers. Any responses here?
Well, I agree with all of the comments, actually. Yeah. I agree with all of the comments that we need to do everything that we can on the national level, on the community level, because it is not only the mangroves here. We're talking about the ecosystem. We're talking about livelihoods. And so it's an impact here on not only the ecosystem itself, but it's also on your pocketbook, on your livelihoods, on your ability to earn, on your ability to feed yourself. So these are things that are very important. The whole question of the circular economy that has been mentioned is very important with the plastics and so on. All of these are quite important, on the national level. And I think education, public education and awareness, all of these things needs to be done. And to mainstream climate change issues into national development and into community empowerment, and to let people understand the relationship between their responsible action and their own livelihood and community empowerment. I think that is very important. But I want to hesitate to say on the global level, we are talking here about global emissions. Of course, while it is not right to say that we should not be doing much and doing many things, the question is, we are insignificant. Our Grenada's commitment to climate change, greenhouse gas, is 0.0005% of the total. It's insignificant, but it is important that we take the action on the ground and send the right signals that we will be taking action based on our own capacities and capabilities. But what we really need to do is to put our voices to ensure that the big emitters of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the other greenhouse gases, the big emitters, are the ones to really remove the needle to move the climate to the point where we can safely survive. We are here also talking about renewable energy and energy efficiency. These are the things that we need to do on a national level. Energy efficiency, for instance, is very critical. And renewable energy, we are actually exploring solar and geothermal and so on. It's very important also for us on a national level. But I think we cannot let the big emitters who are responsible and who have been responsible, we call it historical responsibility in the negotiations, and the polluter pay principle we cannot let them get off the hook and continue to pollute. We need to have a voice, and that's why we are in the negotiations, to ensure that we have a voice. And a voice comes with question of equity. Of course, we have common responsibility. We call it CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. It is differentiated on the levels of ability to do and on the levels of the historical responsibility. So we, with our respective capacity, must do what we need to do. We must do what we can do, but we need to be aided by the resources that will have to come from the developed countries that are responsible for the pollution in the first place. Mm-hmm. That's the process, and that is the basis of loss and damage.
Dr. Thomas, very important, very informative there. Information coming out of the COP summit and what that would mean for Grenada and the benefits that would be derived from that, and what loss and damage would look like as it pertains to the future of climate mitigation in the Caribbean. So thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. Is there any final comments before we get to the next segment from you?
Well, I think my final comment will be that I noticed that you will be having two crime experts afterwards. Maybe they could take on the crime of climate change onto their portfolio also, because I think you would have seen there are several issues where that is becoming a quite topical issue. But I need to say thank you very much for inviting me.
How do you criminally indict neoliberal corporations? That's the question, because a lot of these we talk about countries in these global emitters in the global north, but they are funded by big oil, and big oil to me is a criminal enterprise in many respects. So how do you go after them? That's the question. But I think these criminal experts can put that under.
Yeah, I think the criminal experts might help us to unravel some of that. So thank you very much. But I think we have to keep the focus on. The focus is not only on climate change. The focus is on sustainable development. And we need to look at all of the 17 sustainable development goals in totality in a comprehensive manner. We need to address climate. We need to address biodiversity loss. We need to address issues of poverty. Health and all of these are interlinked, and we need to take it as a complete package for the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dr. Thomas, thank you again for appearing on the Bubb Report. This was a very important conversation, and I hope to have you back at some point. This was a very informative conversation, so thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, that was Dr. Spencer Thomas. He's one of the negotiators who was part of the Grenada delegation at the recently concluded COP summit. Now, for the next segment, we will welcome a group of panelists who will make sense of the crime picture in the OECS in particular. On the neighboring island of St. Lucia, several brutal killings have shaken the tourist-friendly island as murders in the country reached record levels. In fact, St. Lucia is only third to Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica as having the highest crime rates in the Caribbean per capita. The country recorded 25 killings during the last 5 months of this year and a record of 74 homicides in 2021. So stand by, folks. We will be right back with the panel segment of the week. The next segment of the Bubb Report comes to you compliments S.A. Johnson Funeral Home. They are a Caribbean family-owned funeral service. They offer a full range of funeral services at affordable prices in New York City. They can be reached on 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home. Because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
children have been charged with 875 major crimes in Jamaica. There have been 79 murder charges, 66 for shooting. A total of 175 children have been charged for rape over the period. There have been 256 charges for breaches of the Firearm Act, 175 for break-ins, 89 cases of robbery, and 65 for aggravated assault.
The 63-page document entitled CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy 2013 was thoroughly prepared by the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, IMPACS, and adopted by the CARICOM heads of government at the 24th Intersessional Meeting in Haiti. It was commissioned by the region's governments in the face of rising criminality. The document notes that all CARICOM member territories are affected by the same issues, and a joint approach in dealing with them is best. The risk and threats to the region were prioritized at 4 levels. At level 1 is transnational organized criminal activities involving illicit drugs and illegal guns, gangs and organized crime, cybercrime, financial crimes, and corruption. The criminals, according to IMPACS, are supported by the facilitators, which consist of unscrupulous and corrupt professionals within key sectors of the economy, such as financial, legal, justice, law enforcement and security, public officials, and even government officials. Level 2 threats include human trafficking and smuggling, natural disasters, and public disorder crimes. At level 3 are significant potential risk and include attacks on critical infrastructure and terrorism. Level 4 feature future risk with unknown probabilities and consequences. These include climate change and pandemics.
And all of the discussion and everything that has been mentioned here is part of those strategic goals. But even better yet, they came up with not just the strategic goals, but they came up with an action plan with actions to be taken for each of those 14 strategic goals, with responsibilities, with performance indicators and time frames.
With local law enforcement officials publicly noting that the majority of the homicide cases here are gang-related, fueled by disputes over illicit drugs and guns, Regis says St. Lucia must look to the strategy which places strong emphasis on addressing the profits derived from illicit activities and also the prosecution of the facilitators of criminality in order to effect a permanent reduction in the level of crime. Presenting the document in 2013, IMPACS estimated that with sufficient political will and bold and courageous leadership, the implementation of the CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy could significantly reduce serious crime within the next 3 years. 4 years later, and no movement on it by St. Lucia, the island has seen significant increases in most major crime categories.
And welcome back, folks. We are now joined by the panelists for this panel segment. Now, going on from the last segment, we were talking about the crime rate in St. Lucia. Now, in neighboring Grenada, however, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the murder rates as compared to St. Lucia are markedly lower, with Grenada having one of the lowest crime rates in the OECS. Our next guest will attempt to make sense of this crime picture. As a programming note, we also reached out to the Royal Grenada Police Force, who appeared to appear on a subsequent program to dissect the crime data from Grenada from the last 2 quarters. And at this time, I wish to welcome Mr. Osbert Regis, who is the former Commissioner of Police in St. Lucia, as well as Dr. Niels Chaitan, who is a crime reduction specialist, who is also Grenadian. Gentlemen, we were also supposed to be joined by Mr. Jerry Edwin, a Grenadian criminal defense attorney, but we have not had the opportunity to hear from him as yet. If someone is listening and knows Mr. Edwin, please tell him to reach out to us. We are waiting for him. But gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Bubb. It's good to have me on the program, and I want to say a shout out to all the listeners out there who are online.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you
Go ahead.
for the invite. whatever we can do here and see within the OECS context that will assist you from not taking the route that we have taken would be my pleasure to discuss.
Okay. Now, Dr. Chaitan, I want to begin with you because in an article that you penned, an op-ed that you penned in the Now Grenada publication, you said, quote, "No longer can we just sit passively around, repeating soul-soothing greetings like God is good all the time, and all the time God is good, inside of our churches and government offices, even standing to pray to start every meeting, while sitting back down and doing nothing intentional to quench the homicidal flame that's devouring our neighbors before they explode on our shores," unquote. Now, Dr. Chaitan, some might say that your view is a bit alarmist as Grenada continues to enjoy some of the lowest crime rates, given its close proximity to Trinidad and Tobago, which is considered one of the murder capitals of the Western Hemisphere. Your thoughts on that notion?
And that is so. I have gotten the comments back, by the way, because Grenada is nowhere close in terms of the crime or the homicide rate there. But that is why I use a caption that I did. The caption simply said Grenada needs to, and of course the caption is coming from old sayings from granny and from mommy and that kind of stuff. You know, when your neighbor's house is on fire, you wet yours, right? That's where my caption came from. So I'm just simply saying, if you read the article, you will see where actually I gave the information. I quote the statistics, the figures. But I'm also saying, I also sent the article that we are in the single digit, but we should not sit comfortably, you know. So the article is captioned, Grenada needs to wet its house. So be proactive now, because your neighbor's house on fire, right? I'm not saying our house is on fire as yet, but I'm saying it's a caution, it's a clarion call, it's a trumpet call. Guys, let's look around. Let's look at what are some of the situations, some of the issues that may have gotten that crime numbers where they are in the Caribbean, and let's wet ours right now.
What are some of the conditions you think are on the ground in Grenada that might be amenable to or fertile ground for an explosion of crime? Are you seeing any conditions on the ground in Grenada that can that we should begin to pay attention now, that we should begin wetting, figuratively speaking?
Yeah, Dr. Bubb, that question it's a deep foundational question, right? You may want me to say, okay, from traveling around, from visiting different parishes and communities, what is it I'm seeing? Well, you know what? This is a foundational question because what we've seen is historic. What we've seen is traditional, but we have not been paying attention to the traditional. For example, when I came back to Grenada, of course, I was coming in from St. Kitts, where the 3 years there, they had a very high homicide count, of course. And they brought me from Toronto there through 3 years with them. When we left, they saw a 71% drop. Of course, it wasn't my effort alone. It was working with all the stakeholders, right? The change stakeholders there. But when I came back here and I looked at what was happening, and I looked at the sexual assaults, the homicide was not steep and still isn't steep, right? Because we are still in the single digits. But when I look at the disrespect, when I look at the suspensions in school, because for the last 2 years I've worked with the Ministry of Education, and my friend, we do not look at the root of the problem. Most time we talk about the fruit of crime. You know, we talk about, well, what we see. We talk about the burglaries, and we talk about the weapons and stuff. But where did that come from? We do not look at the root of the problem, and if we do not look at the root, what we're going to have is a reoccurrence of the issues, especially when we went through something like the COVID. pandemic. And you know, Dr. Bubb, when I came back here in Grenada, I was asked to work along with a group of colleagues of mine to put together, and I mentioned it in the article, to put together a roadmap, a psychosocial roadmap for moving on beyond COVID. And I predicted then, and some of my colleagues did too, that there would be a psychosocial pandemic as a fallout, because there were so many things that we went through the pandemic, the restrictions, the new routines, the protocol, the enforcement of protocols, that was going to have a direct impact on people's attitudes and people's behavior after COVID-19. So yes, COVID-19 and all the restriction exacerbated that. But the root of the problems, some of the foundational roots of the problems were there traditionally, but we did not address them. I mean, my friend there, former Commissioner Regis from St. Lucia, and by the way, Mr. Regis, you know, I have been to St. Lucia recently, done a lot of work there, work with from your Prime Minister right into your community, through a show and Conway and what have you. But what is it? We use an enforcement approach, right? Mm-hmm. One man said to me in St. Lucia, you know what, Dr. Chaitan, you know, when you're talking about crime reduction, you're talking about police, talking about police work. And I said to him, I disagree with that. Because in our work, we have a 3-dimension approach: a prevention approach, an intervention approach, and a rehabilitative approach. And Mr. Regis, that's why when I came to St. Lucia, I went to Borderley Correction Center, right? And did some work with your staff, and did some work with the inmates there, because we have been relying only on the police. When, Dr. Bubb, we have parents who are not modeling good morals and good civic behavior. You have teachers that are just out. You have both. I mean, you look at it. I mean, one of the things that we stress, and by the way, in passing, let me congratulate Minister Philip Telesford, who is now the Minister of Social Development, and his Prime Secretary, Veronica Charles. Because last night I was one of the presenters at the Spice Basket, where they brought a number of community guys together, and we spoke to them, right? We spoke to them about some of the issues, because what's feeding crime and violence are some, what we call in the social realm, some adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as childhood trauma, that feed that kind of behavior. So we can't leave it up to the police. We can't leave it to enforcement alone. We have to go back and tweak as low back, Dr. Bubb, as the home.
And let me bring in former Commissioner Regis. Again, the theory of the case here is that law enforcement addresses the symptoms of the problem and not so much the cause of the problem. And are you saying that in neighboring St. Lucia, the country in which you had the privilege of serving as head of the police service there, that in neighboring St. Lucia, they were unable to address some of the root causes of crime?
Well, here's one of the things, and the good doctor is right, that if we talk about crime, we think of a police solution. Mm-hmm. Crime is a social problem. It cannot be given a law enforcement solution. It has to be given a social solution or social solutions. Now, traditionally, that has always been the thing, that leave it to the police. Even as a young constable, some parents would bring their kids to the police station and say, I'm fed up with him. You know, maybe if you beat him up and that sort of thing, we'll learn. So again, the whole issue of, and I agree entirely with what the doctor said, we need to look at the causation factors. Now, what have we done differently? Have we done anything differently? No. Over the past couple of years, when this thing evolved from the traditional crime to what is now in our country, organized crime. That is what is fueling the guns and the drugs and all of that. What have we done to try to retool the society? The school curriculum, has it changed? We've had a lot of homicides where it is just petty disputes. But have we done anything in terms of tweaking the curriculum to address issues of conflict resolution, in giving our young people the coping skills to deal with conflicts and drugs and all of the other deviant things you have going on? Let's look at Castries. As the doctor said, he knows it well. Castries, the city of Castries, is almost entirely surrounded, save for the sea, by dysfunctional communities. And this and ex-Prime Minister Sir John Compton, when he recognized that, and he admitted perhaps in his thrust for development, he concentrated too much on infrastructural development and left social development behind. So we are paying for all of this now. We have a population that we have allowed to go their own way and saying, oh, it's rights, it's their rights, and leave them alone, they'll grow up and that sort of thing. And that's where we are today. He addressed the issue of dropouts. A lot of the victims and perpetrators of the serious crimes we have are school dropouts. So that we are now reaping the consequences of this, as one friend of mine put it, this orchard of sour oranges we planted and allowed to fester. We are now reaping those sour oranges. Unfortunately, we still have not come up with a structured approach to dealing with this thing. I mean, every time a new administration comes, somebody comes with a bright idea, the politician comes with a bright idea. But we have failed even at the national level to come up with a national plan, to come up with something structured that is multidisciplinary. Yes, a lot is being done, but it's been done in silos. The right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. So we need to have that kind of approach, that kind of multi-sectorial approach. Now, my frustration in all of this is that CARICOM, in recognition of that situation, commissioned a CARICOM crime and security strategy. It was implemented, adopted by the heads in Haiti in 2013. So that tells me that governments within CARICOM have a responsibility to go along with it. The blueprint is there. It has given us the background. They have done all of the academic and theoretical work. The science put us in the right direction and actually gave us an action plan. I dare say not a single government has implemented, adopted this thing, and implemented in full. Yes, they may have tinkered with certain aspects of it, but it has given 14 strategic goals covering every aspect of issues and areas that would bring a change, a positive change to crime and security. Crime and security. It's not enforcement. Law enforcement is a very small component of that. A very small component of that. How do you deal with crime if you do not deal with corruption within the public service? How do you deal with crime seriously if we do not put minimum standards for persons holding public office with serious consequences? How do you deal with crime seriously if we have not gone back and reviewed our curriculum and say, are we just teaching students the relationship between concepts, but not the relationship between people. All of those things are the foundations that we need to build so that we can have that. We talk about Bodley. The doctor said he visited Bodley. Just last week in Parliament, the minister responsible with responsibility for Home Affairs in the report stated that we have approximately, I think, about 519 persons, the prison population, of which 160,000 are penal, 160 are penal. 300 plus are remand prisoners. That is disturbing. That for me is disturbing. I think it's a serious human rights issue. That you have persons, more than 50% of your inmate population are awaiting trial, in some cases up to 5 years. Now,
you said people are waiting trial for up to 5 years?
Some of them, it is right there. The doctor can confirm. Yes?
That is correct. I got that stats too when I was at Bodley. I heard that too.
Right. So here's what it is. Apart from we are not doing enough in terms of the preventative aspect and building a society that would be resilient towards that sort of thing. And we have a case right now when somebody has been arrested and is awaiting trial. You have that large population here. So people resort to bush justice because they do not have confidence in the system. Revenge, we see a lot of revenge killings. Also, we have a situation where it is like I am touching a hot pan. I may get burnt 50% of the time, but even when I get burnt, it is going to take me 5 years to fill it, or a year. All of those things do not encourage the climate or the whole climate of obeying the laws and being held accountable. People need to be held accountable. So when we look at the law enforcement, I'm not even looking at the police per se, because the police has its own problems. We have seen in the region, and we are talking about past 20, 15 years, every time a new administration comes in, they tinker with the police. If a commissioner of police is appointed by one administration, when the other one comes, he gets rid of him. Now, I'm not saying he may not have reason, but that seems to be a pattern. They take a different direction. We need to have a national.
What do you think is sort of the downside or the disadvantage of?
Well, there's lack of continuity.
Leadership.
There's a lack of continuity. Okay. One, it creates instability within the organization. It encourages undermining, because some persons are looking and said, oh, yeah, this fellas might win, this fellas might lose, and who's the next person? So it starts to undermine the whole process at the leadership level. It removes the confidence that persons, if you start a program under one administration, as if there are people just waiting for that administration to change, to dump it and go along with something else. There needs to be a national plan, a national strategy, which is all-encompassing, so that the opposition is also part of it, so that there is commitment, national commitment to move forward with it.
Sort of a bipartisan approach.
I don't even like bipartisan. Okay. It is bigger than that. It's a natural, it's a national consensus from all stakeholders, including the political parties. So we can say, all right, here's what it is. And we look at, of course, CARICOM has already indicated to us that the most important part there is we're talking about domestic and transnational crime, because people are dying and so on. But there are other areas. Should we not look at I said, office, the standard in public office, because the CARICOM document spoke about facilitators of crime, being government officials.
And if I may, I just wanted to cite from the document, because I think it's important to give our viewers that context. The report says, and let me go ahead and share the screen here. The report says here, the criminality perpetuated by the Tier 1 threats is driven by the desire and pursuit of profit, power, and prestige. The criminals are supported by the facilitators, which consist of unscrupulous and corrupt professionals within key sectors of the economy, such as the financial, legal, justice, law enforcement and security, public officials, and even government officials who help them to secure and conceal their assets.
There you are.
That's a very damning indictment on...
Well, it's across the Caribbean. Across the Caribbean. Somewhere in that report, it says that corruption is one of the things that that is affecting the CARICOM, our CSME, and to see real growth within the region. Yeah. So it is an issue. We cannot, because sometimes the very people on whose behalf you, as police, think that you're working, you might be stepping on toes. Yes, so we need to be serious about it. We need to be serious, hold people accountable. Because if the officers know that nobody's been held accountable, then what do you do? What do you do? So yes, we have to look at the operational deficiencies and things within the respective police forces. But also, we, I think, need the leadership. That's another thing that the document said. Bold leadership is required. And if we carry out the action plan that they have indicated, we should. These are the experts. You know, politicians like to come up with ideas and show that they, I reckon this and reckon this. But it can't be, we cannot afford to be having home remedies. You know, like you have a cold, go drink this bush, that bush, and the other. What we do must be scientifically sound. It must be based upon empirical evidence. And I too have a problem with institutions like the University of the West Indies. I think enough is not being done in terms of research, in terms of the empirical side of things, so that the decision makers, the police and others, can implement strategies which have been researched by the academics and the persons who are there to provide that information. I don't think enough has been done, not just UE, but other academic institutions within the region. This is bread and butter issues. It's not just about the economy. It's about our own survivability. It's about citizen security. But we have not done anything, and we are treating this thing like the common cold. It will eventually go away. No, it will not eventually go away.
Mm-hmm.
Grenada,
before you make that point about Grenada, and I'll bring you back to make that point. But Dr. Chaitan, to pick up on what Commissioner Regis, former Commissioner Regis, said there about treating this issue as the common cold, that it's just going to go away, and in the context of Grenada, perhaps it will never reach to our shores. I want you to pick up on that for us.
Yeah, well, the truth about it, wherever I go, I've seen that laissez-faire attitude that the numbers are up to this year, but don't worry, it'll be done next year. When this article was written, that article that you mentioned there, Dr. Bubb, on the 17th, I think it was, of November. From then to now, the numbers in St. Lucia jumped from 60 to 66, if not 67, right? And
we're talking homicides here. I just want to...
We're talking homicide. Yes. Right? Right. So the question about it all depends on how deeply a government feels, how deeply it kicks you in the gut. Like I told them, when I went to St. Lucia, I met from the Prime Minister's office right now. Of course, I made recommendations to them because Dr. Bubb, and to kind of answer Mr. Regis's concern, I brought to St. Lucia something that we had worked with in St. Kitts and got amazing results. I do understand his concern about doing things ad hocly, everybody doing something in their corner. And so it was 2015 that Bahamas was going through a similar situation. And I was called from my office in Toronto. and say, what can you do for us? That's where I developed something called the EDER approach, EDER. It's a 4-dimensional blueprint towards sustainable crime reduction. Now, unfortunately, I could not implement it in Bahamas because hurricane passed there and they moved from crime fighting to survival. But in 2016, the government Ministry of National Security for St. Kitts called. And when I went in there, one of the things we did, Dr. Bubb, was to get everybody involved. Because throughout the Caribbean, wherever I travel, I met some very brilliant, extremely brilliant people. And I don't want anybody to think that when I come to your country, and you ask me to come to St. Lucia, that Chaitan is the answer. I'm not the answer. It's all of us working together. One of the things that I've done, Dr. Bubb and Mr. Regis, is that I put together a symposium that's called Uprooting Crime and Violence, where we look at 13 generic psychosocial roots that feed crime and violence. Now, I have in my hand a document. I'll put it up to the camera, right? To my camera, that is, right? This is what Mr. Regis, the kids did. Because as we looked at the 13 generic roots that feed almost every kind of crime, whether it's blue collar, white collar, or community crime, we brought together at the Marriott Hotel in St. Kitts about 150 professionals, psychologists, sociologists, teachers, educational administrators, police, the clergy, lay people, health professionals. They all came together and we looked at these 13 roots of 13 generic roots. Then what we did, we broke off into workshops. I think in the Caribbean, we are really good at talk shops, but we are not really good at workshops. Things get afterwards. And we got these interest groups to sit together in a work environment, Dr. Bubb, where they looked at the route that was most germane to the profession. They would take that route now and work it through for one day, where they will build a plan how to mitigate that particular route, right? And so this document, which was called the National Crime Reduction and Prevention Strategy for St. Kitts and Nevis, and if you look at it, you'll see the crest of St. Kitts and Nevis, the coat of arms, and my logo is next to it. And what happened there, they now tabulated all the answers they got. Short-term, long-term, programs, awareness campaigns, and all was collated into one document. This is a document that was used over the 3 years. So the police is in there, the teachers are in there, the mental health workers are in there, and now get someone, because the document could be shelved easily. You now take the document and you have someone that I call a warden, all right, that has a document. I will now go around and say to, for example, to the clergy, Pastor so-and-so, you were the head of the round table. In our national document, you said in 3 months, we'll do this. Where are you with it? Do you need help? And so that in St. Kitts, what got the homicide rate down to 71%, and I didn't say that, it was the then Prime Minister, Timothy Harris, that made the declaration from cabinet that they saw a 71% drop in homicide, is because every different professional component they were all working together on a plan, taking a route and working it through. Now, the next thing
very well. Yes. Quickly, and then we have to get back to Mr. Regis. Yes, please. Dr. Chaitan, go ahead. You wanted to say one more thing. Yes, go ahead.
I heard Mr. Regis talking about the corruption at the top. As a consultant, I solve crime and violence from the bottom up. And when I say up, I mean up. That means I get to the police too. I get to the police because as a consultant right now in Grenada, with the last police course, okay, the batch that was being trained, I went in there. They asked me to go in there and do work, sensitize the police. All right. I've worked in different police stations doing professional development for them. I hear the cry of the road cop element. I hear it. I hear the cry of the rogue in the port to that allow stuff to come in. I hear that. But to change that, my friend, is going to take a period of time when we have to advise, educate, right? It's a change of
so it's a full cultural change. It's a full cultural change. Yeah. I said it's a full cultural change that has to happen. It's sort of like, it's sort of like when you're working the land, you have to get down and get rid of those weeds first before you even think about planting, right? And making sure that the soil is properly watered.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. And so, Mr. But before Mr. Regis come in there,
yes,
in 2000 I wrote an article because I've been writing for the last 2 years as a crime specialist, and the article was called. Last night I shared it in the Spice. By the way, I shared it instantly, and Regis, the men in the community were asking for it. Now the article was called "There Are No Bad Boys." And when I say this, police officers push back at me. What do you mean there are no bad boys? Who are we cuffing? Who are we putting in the cell? I was doing a commentary on the famous criminal killer in the States, right? As I looked at it, I did a little research into his background, and he was called a psychopath. Ted Bundy, of course, I'm talking about.
Bundy.
But when you look at Ted, and Ted was killed. Ted was killed for his crime. But when you look at Ted's background, where Ted was coming from, the abuse he went through, really shaped Ted into a criminal. I'm suggesting it's the pain. I'm suggesting the childhood trauma. I'm suggesting it is the adverse childhood experiences. So in that article, listen to me, I wrote, in my dealing with young men over the last 20 years, I'm convinced that there are no bad boys. Listen to the boys I think we have. Misguided boys, hurt boys, traumatized boys, grief-stricken boys, disappointed boys, negatively labeled boys, rejected boys, low self-esteem boys, depressed boys, fatherless boys, bullied boys, sexually abused boys, unwanted and unloved. And by the time I got to the end of the list, boys were seeing themselves. They would say, that's me. I see myself there. We have to get to the root of the issue. Because really and truly, road cop or not, whether they are road cop or not, they would have nobody to arrest. They have nobody to put the cuffs on if we go to the root of the problem. I'm not saying that the world's going to get better, sir. I'm not saying if we are Christians and we believe that the world's going to get bad, that's what they tell us in church. I'm not saying we could save the whole world, but I'm saying we could impact one boy who may be able to turn a whole community around.
Yes, Mr. Regis, you were going to make a point about Grenada before.
But even before, let me just say that
yes, I
don't think what the doctor is saying and I are at cross purposes. I'm just saying that we need to have a national strategy. We need to have a plan which is all-encompassing that will deal with the psychosocial issues, but we also need to recognize that there are two things that, as we said, we need to look at prevention, we need to look at intervention and recommendations for the future. Before we can start the healing, we need to stop the bleeding. And there are certain interventions that need to be taken now. This organized crime and the drugs and the things, this is generated by profit. It's a business model. Yes,
and there has to be a demand somewhere in order for supply to happen.
Well, yes, we will always have that, but if we make it a very unprofitable and difficult business proposal or business model, then perhaps people will think elsewhere. Yes, there will always be a market. But what are we doing enough to try to deal with this? Now, the strategy, unfortunately, many politicians, especially now, we're talking about processes that will work in 3 and 4 years. And boy, you know, I only have 2 years before elections. You know, these processes will not help me win the next election because they are interested in events. We want to see events that will deal with it between now and just now. Yes, I mean, we've had that before in this country, where in 2010, a very interesting crime strategy was adopted. In the process, 13 of our very prolific offenders met their demise at the hands of the police. Crime trended downwards for about 5 years after this, because if you get rid of the most prolific guys, then there would be a reduction. But did we solve the problem? Was it, I've always, the analogy I've given about this is, yes, we had mosquitoes in our house. We have a drum of stagnant water in the yard. We use Bubb or whatever you use, and we sprayed the house. We got rid of the mosquitoes. You get a break for the evening, a few hours. But how much Bubb are you going to use to get a solution when that drum of stagnant water is still in the yard? Now, what does that drum of stagnant water represent? So that is where all of the social issues and all of the things that the doctor spoke about. But parallel to that, we need to look at what is happening now to hold people accountable, to have a sort of strategy. It has to be holistic, because he's talking about developing the person, developing the young person. That has to be part of the formal setting of our curriculum. Yes, we need to look at how we can provide the different social support for families, for the young people who are now parents and have no clue as to what they're doing. They are part of the problem. So it has to be holistic. It has to be. But what we're doing now, we are operating like musicians, jazz musicians, and some of them playing by ear. We need to have a blueprint so all of us can follow. Now, back to the point about what is it that
Grenada
can learn from our experience. When you spoke with me about being on this program, and you said that you're very concerned that Grenada has 6 homicides. Well, we had 66. Yes? Yeah. And, you know, it is a disturbing thing. It is a disturbing thing. And sometimes people want to talk about, oh, well, it's bad for tourism, it's bad for the citizens who are getting killed. It's bad for all of us. And that is my first concern. I live here. I hope to spend the rest of my life here. But what is it that we relaxed? What is it that we did not do? What is it that you did? I don't think it has to do with strong law enforcement. I think it had to do with the social issues. Grenada is well known, and let me say something controversial here. I know I have a good relationship with Grenada. I've been there quite a few times during the revolutions and all the way. Are there things that helped develop a certain sense of discipline during a particular period that you are still reaping the benefits of? I know in Grenada that there's this zero tolerance to fellas walking around with the pants down and all this nonsense. We in St. Lucia allowed a lot of those things that were not threatening then. You know, it's just the boys and so on. I remember a very prominent attorney challenging the school system, a particular school, when the school decided they needed to search school bags. Mm-hmm. It's my son's right. You can't do that. You can't touch this. And the hair, you know, the code for getting the hair trimmed. All of these little things were allowed to erode and erode and erode, and just all of a sudden overtook us. What was the policy for kids who were troubled? Yes, the ministries at one time, get rid of them. They are out there. What are they doing now? What are they doing?
Do they not have a juvenile rehabilitation centers in St. Lucia?
No,
as
we
we
don't.
do in Grenada?
No, we don't. No, we don't. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest headaches that we have, well, we have for boys, which is called a boys thing center. That is more, they talk about care and protection, but it's more a detention center for the criminally minded juvenile. But we do not have for females. So one of the greatest headaches that a police officer has is if you have to detain a juvenile female, you have no place to put them. Okay? So we have all sorts of creative ways of dealing with that. What I'm saying is there is not enough emphasis on the youth in terms of providing those sorts of coping skills. Yes, you have the National Youth Council and all of this, but we need to strengthen our youth so that they can go through those things. We need to speak out on matters of corruption. We need to, those of us who hold high office, public office, need to be the examples. Sometimes when I look at Parliament, these days it's a little quieter, but there were times when I looked at Parliament, I said, my goodness, I hope one of these days somebody don't shoot somebody in there or something. But it is the level of disagreement and how we conflict resolution. And if there is that kind of feeling that these fellas are about to jump on each other's throat, whether it is they just playing for the camera or not, what does it do? When government is seen as breaking its own rules, how does that filter down into the society in terms of creating a culture of persons who would respect laws? So we need to move and see it from a wider thing, and not just tinker with little bits here, little bits here. It has to be holistic. It has to be holistic.
And you're saying that leaders should lead by example.
By example.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of our leaders have let us down. It's not just about bringing home the bacon. It's also about what tone you set for the society that you lead.
And then what we want to do now, panelists, is that we want to get some comments from our viewers and listeners. We'll begin with you, Shireen, who's a regular watcher of the Bubb Report. She says, I like how he set example, because we all knew in the past the leaders were worst at showing examples. We have another viewer saying, Marissa Gray, we grew up in a society where collectivism and community help to raise and shape our behaviors and way of thinking. However, we have started to adopt a more individualistic mentality on family, and the sense of community has dwindled exponentially. We have another viewer who's saying we are sugarcoating addressing the problems of our youth, so we should remain popular in their eyes. Well, that's an interesting comment there. Shireen is saying it's a holistic approach, agree there. There is support within schools and communities. However, how many are open to accessing help? The student support of the Ministry of Education, and I believe she's referencing Grenada, has and continues to provide stellar support and advocate for many students and families. Let's get to another comment. Anthony Howard is saying we have to stop grabbing at the American excuses. Many of us Grenadians grew up in houses without a father figure in the house, and we did not grow up to become criminals. I am personal testament to that. I was raised in a household of women. Of course, there were men around who were my mentors as well. So there were males around me that I benefited from as mentors. Let's see here. Corruption is now a systematic pandemic. Interesting. Hudson George is saying, Dr. Chaitan, in the case of St. Kitts, most of the citizens are not owners of the land as property. There was a period of drug trade linked with people close to politicians. So he's really speaking to those systemic issues that both of you are addressing. Those are some of the comments that are coming in, viewers and listeners. Thank you for those comments, and we'll take two more. The likes of Robert Philip, Shauna Coffey, our President Minister of Education, Senator David Andrew are great examples leading and advocating through psychological support. That's again in reference to Grenada. And the final comment, we may not have been raised to be criminals, but other aspects of our lives would have been impacted growing up without a father figure in the home. Gentlemen, a lot for you to ruminate on, but I'm sure you've also heard those comments in your own circles of crime reduction. Your thoughts?
Go ahead,
Dr. Chaitan.
Yeah, one of the commenters, of course, talked about importing the American excuses.
Yeah,
and of course the individual apparently was referring to the fatherless. And of course we know for those of us that lived out in North America in the low-income housing areas that we usually refer to as the ghettos, there is an absence of fathers. A lot of the guys that come up and become musical stars and even great sportsmen, all of them too have had that experience, not having a father there. But there is someone who actually stepped in. Dr. Bubb, in your case, you said there was an absentee father too, but you had other people around you that could groom you, that expected, that helped you. I think what we're missing is that help.
Yeah.
I say it very, very honestly. We have to. My wife, she works along with me. She is an early child educator and a parenting coach. And we talk about two kinds of parenting. And you might say to me, Dr. Chaitan, you're really going way far back. We have to go far back if we're going to stop at any at all. One kind of parenting is called accidental parenting, and the other one is parenting by choice. A child that was chosen, a parent that chose or timed a pregnancy had what it takes to raise a child. That child would go differently from an accidental parent, where the mother, just happened, met someone overnight, or saw them for the first time, look great, talk great, and then end up getting pregnant. And it happens. And then what do we see in our school system? We see a lot. I'm not saying all. But when I give that scenario, a lot of parents say to me, yeah, Dr. Chaitan, it's true. What you said is true. And when the boys, and then mom is not there, dad is not there to groom that boy, to nurture the boy, teach that boy to be a man, teach him morals. And the mom is not even getting support financially from that man. She doesn't know where he is. And she gets so frustrated. Mm-hmm. She looks at the boy. The boy wants a phone. The boy wants some shoes because his friends have it. And she doesn't have the money to give him. And she get angry and say, boy, you see how you bad like your father? Or you ugly like your father? You see how your nose big like your father? These killing two men at once. So that poor boy now dragged to school. He doesn't want to go. He doesn't have what his friends have. He drags to school and he gets there late. And the teacher instead of I wonder what happened to Michael today. I wonder what happened to Robert today. Look at his demeanor. Teachers, read the face. I'm calling on you, teachers. Read the faces. Read the demeanor of that boy. And instead of just saying, okay, stand in the corner, go down to the principal's office. See how you can help figure out what is hurting this boy. You could be saving a boy. I was that boy in Methodist School in Grenada, Dr. Bubb. I was that boy that had a big mouth and was mischievous. Every teacher knew me. And they told me somebody's going to kill me, I'll go to jail because of my big mouth. But a teacher saw me and said, what could I do with that boy, big mouth? Mm-hmm. Dr. Bubb, he has taken me to Africa. He has taken me to Europe. He's taken me around the world. We just need someone who would say, I know daddy's not there, but hey, man, I see something in you. That's why when you read my bio, it always says, Dr. Chaitan goes to communities and look for one good trait in someone which he uses to build their wings for flying. Well, all I had was a big mouth.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things, just to piggyback on what you said there, one of the things that we have to stop doing really is just, we have this tendency to dismiss that troubled child, and we use things, oh, they dunce, you know, look at where they come from, look at the community that they come from, right? And as an educator, because I am an educator, one of the things I always look for, I look for my students who come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. And I pay most attention to those students because those are the students who do not necessarily have the resources, who do not have the support system, who needs that help, and who needs all of the help that they can get. And you know what is empowering for me? It's empowering when those students who have been discounted as being dunce, as you're going to come out to be a vagabond, as you're going to come out to be a no good. Because I've heard that about myself, by the way, growing up, right? And it's always empowering to see the turnaround in those students' lives when they actually become something and they come back to you. I had one student who came to me. He grew up in what is called, quote unquote, the hood in the United States here. And he came to me and he said, Professor Bubb, thank you for believing in me when you did, for pointing me in the direction of services that I never thought possible that I would have been able to access. And that is important. We need to stop this demonization of our young black men. But I just thought I needed to say that.
But that is the in other words, that's where it starts. It starts off in the family, and everything goes off the rail from there. So that is why I am saying, I too, I taught for a decade before joining the police force. So I also consider myself an educator of sorts. The point is, when I spoke about how is the education system, is our curricula, is it meeting those needs? Or should it be left to the sort of informal education only to build those things? When I went to school many moons ago, there was a subject that was being taught, civics for the Caribbean. There was a book which taught you about being a good citizen, respect for self, respect for God, respect for others, respect for the nation. Let us not assume that the kids will just learn that on their own. If we want to take them in a particular direction, we need to guide them there. And I believe that the whole issue of values and character, these things we need to provide them with the tools so that we can develop their character. That you still have an opportunity to do in Grenada. Because I believe it is, apart from everything else, it is a strong social systems or the values, the traditional values that have you where you are today. I don't think it's because you have a stronger police force than any other. Because we cannot arrest our way through this situation. We cannot jail our way through this situation. We have to find ways of inculcating in our people that even if they have the opportunity and they have the means of committing the crime, that they will not have the desire to commit the crime because of those sets of values that have been inculcated from the very young. But there is also the reality, especially in St. Lucia, where we did not take heed of those signs early enough. And that is why we have a very strong gang culture, which again acts as the surrogate parent that because of all of those things we spoke about, they gravitate towards it because they don't have this strong family setting. So we have that, and a lot of the killings are associated to the gang-related activity. And yes, the profit aspect of it, we have allowed guns to come in unchecked in most cases because the basic national infrastructure to assist failed. It still continues to fail. Right now, we have evidence that more guns are coming in through the legal ports than anything else, through the barrels and through the containers and so on. But we have not put the requisite things in place to address that. We still see that it is the drug trade that fuels the firearms to protect the industry and that sort of thing, their trade. What have we done? Now, we have passed a lot of laws. The laws are good only for when you have caught persons. The laws are no good if you have not caught anybody, all right? It is for punishment, not for resolving any issues. So you can take that lesson from us. Deal with the serious social issues. Strengthen them so that when your young persons grow up to be young men and women, they do not take the route that we have gone. You said about how do you wet your neighbor's house? You have seen ours. Now we're on fire, and we need strong intervention measures to deal with that situation. And of course, the CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy has provided that kind of intervention measures required to address it. But whilst we are dealing with what is there, how do we prevent more from coming into the fire? How do we stop the rot, or slow it down, or mitigate it, so that when this current crop of dysfunctional males, adults, have been dealt with, again, incarcerated and rehabilitated. Now, that's not happening back home. Mm-hmm. The rate of recidivism is 40%. So what we have there is a revolving door. Sometimes you might come in there for non-payment of a very, very minor matter. 6 months later, you're going back as a hardened person because you have been exposed to some higher learning. Mm-hmm. Yes? So we need to look at that. And as I said, where do we start? We start from a national strategy. Dr. mentioned about the strategy in St. Kitts. Whatever form, based upon the culture, based upon the situation, based upon the context, because the context in Grenada is different from the context in St. Lucia. Yeah. Fortunately for you, you are a lot better in terms of your context, where you are right now. So that gives you an opportunity to do things differently. Do things differently. We are at the deep end now, so we need to do things differently. But we need to do things that are appropriately done. Things that are appropriate to our current situation. We need to deal with that.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, what we're going to do, we're going to come up for air and we will take a quick break, and then we will come back to get some closing comments from the both of you. So viewers and listeners, please stand by. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are?
To the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. The unions are not threatening to withdraw their labor, and neither are they threatening to shut the country down, as you did.
I think your summarization of my position is highly inaccurate, and may I dare say a bit inflammatory.
The strategy did not work the last time for you. So what would make this?
Well, you're assuming that we're doing the same strategy.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back. We are discussing the crime wave, the root causes of the crime wave in some parts of the OECS region, with St. Lucia coming in after Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago as having one of the highest crime rates per capita in the Western Hemisphere. And certainly I want to use this opportunity, gentlemen. First of all, thank you for agreeing to appear on the program today. But Dr. Chaitan, I want to begin with you with some closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bubb. Ladies and gentlemen that's listening out there, we have to understand that to reduce crime at all would take a multifaceted approach. And we all have to get involved. We cannot turn a blind eye. It will take the home, parents. If you want, you cannot say, do as I say and don't do as I do. The strongest way to get your child, to teach your child anything is through modeling. You may have to stop that preachy thing and just live. Modeling. Be friends with your neighbors. Be kind. And then in turn it's going to take it up. The school teachers, we need you so badly. Again, I'm saying it's a teacher that got me where I am, and I'm thanking him so much. The churches, it's time to get involved in churches, man. Get the rostrum, get off the pews. It has become, God is good. I said that all the time. Hey, man, this is just cliche. Let's get in the communities. There are children there who need help. They don't have the parents to help them. Churches, get involved. At every level, we need to get involved. And Dr. Bubb and my friend, Mr. Regis, and everyone listening, I'm confident that if we pull together, if we love a little more, we would see a
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Chaitan. And former Commissioner Regis.
Okay, again, because of my background, which is different from Dr. Chaitan's background, I also agree, I'm in full agreement with him that we need a holistic approach and we need to work on the person. We need to work on the individual. But I am also saying that we need to look at the society as a whole. And I'm talking about both the formal and informal components of the society. Policing has a part to play in it, but it's not everything. It's a societal problem, and it requires a societal solution. The best law enforcement can do is to engage in crime suppression that allows the powers that be and the community the opportunity to develop and grow. Because all we have is that we have our finger in the dike. But we can't leave it there all the time. We must allow the powers that be an opportunity to have the processes, to have the different things going. And we need to look at, again, the police forces, the level of instability that the very politicians create. We need to have a more scientifically focused police force where now, because of witnesses, people don't want the whole thing about disclosure. People don't want to go and give evidence in court, especially if they know it is gang related. So the whole scientific aspect of it, forensic support to modernize our police forces. We need to have and develop professional police forces. Yes, and do not break down the same police force that you want to assist. You want them to assist you. You break them down. You need to have accountability. Start off with the officers, start off with whatever it is, but there needs to be accountability. And let us stop blowing hot and cold when it comes to the issue of crime. Some people, when they're in opposition, have all the answers. When they are in government, they do not have the answers. As soon as they go back in opposition, they have the answers that they didn't remember they had when they were in office. We need to stop that nonsense. It's like rain. It falls on everybody's house. So let's stop playing this, blaming this blame game for the sake of petty politics. Because you will inherit a country that you can't govern if you're not part of the solution in opposition. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on the issue, especially for an audience which is outside of the country. I try not to get into our own little issues, but just to speak as to what you can do to avoid going down that rabbit hole that we seem to be in right now.
Mr. Regis, thank you so much. I really wish I spoke a little patois, but you know, the
you all allowed it to
Grenada,
die in Grenada. That's your problem.
Correct. Our foreparents or ancestors, they, in order for them not to understand what they were saying, they spoke in patois without teaching us what it was. So unfortunately, I don't speak any patois, but it's certainly a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Regis. You both gentlemen, both you and Dr. Chaitan, have brought some valuable perspectives, and certainly we will be calling you on your expertise again on whenever these matters arise.
Anytime.
So thank you again.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, that was Mr. Osbert Regis and Dr. Niels Chaitan, a former Commissioner of Police, St. Lucia, and a crime reduction specialist who does work originally from Grenada, but does work throughout the region on assisting in issues of crime reduction. Now, the question is, how many of the average Grenadian earning an average Grenadian salary can actually afford to buy land on the island of Grenada? Are we being priced out as locals from the real estate market in Grenada? And that's one of the questions we'll be raising on the next episode of the Bubb Report next week. So please look out for that segment on issues of land and real estate affordability for the local Grenadian. On behalf of the producers of the Bubb Report, I'm your humble servant, Dr. Kellen Bubb, thanking you all for watching this week's episode. Please remember to share this program, and please remember to join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time for another airing of the Bubb Report. I'm your humble servant, Dr. Kellen Bubb, wishing everyone a pleasant week. Bye-bye.